Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and today we're going to be talking about Gardevoir EX. So, as most people know by now, the deck's been around for a while. Gardevoir EX centers around the namesake Gardevoir EX and its ability Psychic Embrace, which allows us to attach Psychic Energy from our discard pile to our Pokemon as much as we'd like, but every time we do it, that Pokemon takes 20 damage. This is used to power up Gardevoir EX, which can be a little bit of a tanky attacker. 310, isn't the most in the world, but it isn't anything to scoff at either. And then also power up Pokemon like Drifloon and the Screamtail that we'll talk about later, which can do more damage based on how many damage counters are on them. Then, of course, we have Munkidori, which has been a staple in Gardevoir EX for a little while now, which allows us to move damage from our side of the board to our opponents. Gardevoir generally centers around falling behind a little bit in the early game and then making comebacks with all of the sort of little tricks that it has at its disposal that allow it to limit the opponent's draw and heavily disrupt them while attacking exactly the right Pokemon that will sort of slow the opponent down. Now, this deck list is very close to one that was built by Henry Chow, so I want to give full shout out to Henry Chow for innovating this deck. He ended up winning Baltimore Regionals with it. There's only one card changed from the Baltimore Regionals list, I believe, and that is adding the Flutter main to help with the Lost Box matchup. But we'll sort of talk about why everything's in the deck as we go through here. So starting with the Pokemon, we have 2 Gardevoir EX, 4 Kirlia, 4 Ralts, displaying the maximum counts of Kirlia because we want to use Refinement. Kirlia's Refinement ability allowing us to discard 1 card from our hand each turn and draw 2 cards for each Kirlia that we have in play. So just an amazing way to draw through your deck. This is how Gardevoir functions. You use Kirlia to get the Psychic Energy in the discard pile, draw lots of cards, then disrupt your opponent and start attacking. Gardevoir EX Miracle Force just does 190 damage. A nice, pretty solid hit, especially in combination with Munkidori, can knock out most basic Pokemon. Then we have 1 Drifloon. So Balloon Blast is 30 damage for each damage counter on Drifloon. So this caps at 180 without Bravery Charm, but then once we put a Bravery Charm on it and ramp that HP up, it can go up to 300 damage. We can sort of manipulate the math as well with Munkidori. We can pull a damage counter off of it, and then be able to add an extra energy attached and go up to 330 damage. One-shotting basically everything that's relevant in the format. Then we have a 1 of Screamtail. So Screamtail just allowing us to target our opponent's bench instead of their active. With Roaring Scream, we can do 20 damage for each damage counter on Screamtail, which means without Bravery Charm, 160, which is key for pretty much any non-Rulebox Pokemon, or including them plus like Radiants, which are Rulebox Pokemon, but also have that HP range. But then with Bravery Charm, we can go up to 240 and basically be knocking out anything that isn't an evolved 2-prize Pokemon. Then we have Munkidori. So Munkidori allowing us to move damage off of our Pokemon onto our opponent's Pokemon. So removing that sort of weakness of Psychic Embrace of putting damage on our board and actually turning into a strength where we can move damage off of stuff like our Gardevoir EX, which we want to keep healthy, and put it on Pokemon that, maybe a Pokemon with 210 HP or 220 HP, which there are a lot of, which sets them up for Miracle Force range. We can also, the key to Gardevoir EX in general, honestly, is we're using Miracle Force to, almost knock things out, things like Fezandipiti EX, and then on our next turn using Adrenabrain to finish it off. And that way, we can sort of play around Iono, or cards like Counter Catcher, Iono, also mostly just playing around the Fezandipiti EX itself. So that's a very common one. We'll want to use the Miracle Force to do 190 to something and then finish off with the Adrenabrain. That way our opponent doesn't get to activate Fezandipiti, and we can sort of take the prizes in the way that we want to. And that way we can combine it with a key Iono and we want to take knockouts on the right turns. And it also allows us to stay behind, which allows us to keep using Counter Catcher and putting a lot of pressure on with Ionos. Then we have 1 of Flutter main. So like I said, we added this back in to help the Lost Box matchup, but it's pretty good in general. Just a 3 energy attacker, does 90, and then place 2 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon. Very good against Lost Box. It's also, of course, is mostly here for the ability, which says that if it's active, our opponent's active Pokemon doesn't have any abilities. So this shuts off Flower Selecting from Comfy. Can also shut off like Charizard EX if it's active, or an active Quick Search. Also shuts off Legacy Star if you have this active in the early game against Regidrago and their Regidrago is active. Just sort of being a general nuisance, but most importantly for that Lost Box matchup, seeing as they do need to have the Comfys active to use Flower Selecting, meaning it completely shuts them down. And then, unlike Klefki, which we'll talk about next, Hex Hurl can be used to go ahead and also put on some aggression while slowing our opponents down. Then we have Klefki. So Klefki, similar to Fluttermane, has the ability where if it's active, no base Pokemon on either board have any abilities. And then a one energy attack, 10 damage, discard all tools from your opponent's active Pokemon, which honestly you do get a little bit more use out of than you might expect, but it's almost exclusively here just for the ability. Just a much stronger lock, shutting off all abilities, not just abilities in the active spot, meaning we're shutting off Greninja, we're shutting off Teal Mask, shutting off Squawk, any ability on a basic Pokemon, we can just completely shut that down. So Klefki is very key for shutting down our opponent's deck in the early game while we try to set up. Gardevoir can be a bit of a slower deck, so sending Klefki up into the active spot early game, that way our opponent can't use those abilities and get really aggressive with us. One of Fezandipiti EX, just an important draw card. It's sort of in and out of Gardevoir EX lists, but I have found it very strong. Especially with this deck, it allows you to come back against Regidrago in particular, or really just any slow start, like in general. But mostly against Regidrago when they use like Trifrost, having that extra draw to try to find like Rare Candy, really important. If you don't get your Kirlias down quick enough, or if you're playing against like a Dusknoir or just a general Moonlight Shuriken deck, which can knock out your Kirlias really quickly, you need to find Candy. Just that extra draw 3 is really huge. We can also protect it with Bravery Charm so that it's not like such a liability. And then we have Radiant Greninja. So just very like the best Radiant in Gardevoir, hands down. It allows us to get our Psychic Energy into the discard pile and draw more cards. Very synergistic with the deck as a whole. Just basically is like an additional refinement, allowing us to keep drawing through our deck and keep getting those Psychic Energy in the discard pile. Alright, next we move on to the supporters. Play 4 Iono. Like I said, we're pretty much always playing from behind, and we're manipulating the prize cards so that we take them when we want to, which means that we're getting the maximum use out of Iono throughout the entire game. Playing 4, we just want to constantly be disrupting our opponent and refreshing our hand. 2 copies of Arven. Traditional Guardy lists used to play a heavier count, but with this build, we're playing fewer and then more just general draw supporters. But Arven can still search out our Tentacle Machine Evolution early game. That way we can get our Kirlias out. Finds us our Bravery Charm when we need it. And then, whatever item that we might need. We have like lots of powerful items, Rare Candies, Secret Box, Ultra Balls, Earthen Vessels. Just key for that early game setup. And just finding the exact right piece that you need at the right times. So it loses value towards the later game though. Then 2 Professors Research. Like I said, in this list, we're playing a few less Arven and a few more general draw supporters. So we're playing 2 Research. Just dump your hand, draw 7. The most powerful draw supporter of the game. The best way to dig for your Rare Candy pieces. The best way to be aggressive with the deck, which this deck definitely this build of Gardevoir definitely tries to be much more aggressive than any build that we've seen in recent history. So yeah, Research just allows you to churn through the deck, draw as many cards as possible early game. And then 1 Professor Turo scenario, just essential for healing. Also helps get something unstuck against like Snorlax, and just like generally unclog the bench if we have a Pokemon. Maybe our bench is managed in a way that we need to open up a spot for like Munkidori later. Could also just be good in general for picking up like Fezandipiti, so that's not a liability, or even our Gardevoir EX, if we want to just set up a 1 prize board. Then we can pick up our 2 prize Pokemon. That way our opponent can only take 1 prize on their next turn. If they only have 2 prize cards remaining, Turo can be really key in those situations. Then we have 1 of Boss's Orders. Even though we're usually behind, we still want to play 1 boss, especially for the, obviously early game, or if we're being aggressive in a rare game, but mostly any deck that does play from behind still wants 1 boss for the end game. no matter how long you stay behind, usually you're going to have a certain percentage of games where you are at 2-2 prizes, and the only way for you to win is to draw a boss before your opponent. And then take those final 2 prize cards before they do. Then we have the items. So for Buddy-Buddy Poffin, just wanting to make sure that we get out as many Ralts as possible turn 1. Completely essential to the deck. We just want to start setting up and drawing cards as soon as possible. 3 Earthen Vessel. Another difference between this Gardy list and older ones, where we're trying to be more aggressive. We're trying to get those Psychic Energy into the hand really quickly. That way we can start attacking as soon as possible. 2 Ultra Ball, we need Ultra Ball to search out our Gardevoir EX. You can also find Kirlia, but mostly just gathering that Gardevoir when we need it, just having a couple outs to be able to search it. And then 2 Nest Ball, just a little bit of extra Pokemon search, finds us our Fezandipiti and our Greninja as well. But just finding us whatever base Pokemon that we need at the given moment. Just important to have like a couple of extra on top of the Poffins. It also is, another way. Obviously, Ultra Ball can also search those Pokemon out, but there are just like quite a few basic Pokemon that we play that have more than 70 HP that we want to be able to search out with Nest Ball. Then we play 2 Rare Candy. So this is mostly because of Moonlight Shuriken, Dusknoir, and Kyurem, Trifrost, and Regidrago. All of these attacks and abilities can keep us from getting Kirlias onto the board. It can allow us to put our opponent to knock out multiple Kirlias in the same turn. So Rare Candy just gives us that flexibility where we can go just straight from Ralts to Gardevoir. And just in general, we can, even in games where we do keep our Kirlias on the board, it is really nice to be able to go aggressive and get like a turn 2 Rare Candy Gardevoir going first. Just generally allows you to be better going first overall and not be as reliant on Tentacle Machine Evolution. Then we play 2 Counter Catcher, just to make sure that we can pull up Pokemon when we need to. Like I said, we're usually behind, so Counter Catcher's usually going to be alive when we need it to be. Just very powerful. Just basically just an auto gust in the deck at most points in the game. And then 2 Super Rod. We do need lots of recovery in this deck. We're getting our Pokemon knocked out left and right, especially after things like Trifrost or Moonlight Shuriken, knocking out multiple Ralts and multiple Kirlias. Recovery just super important. We also need to be able to get our Dark Energy back. We also, use refinements, right, to draw through our deck. We discard cards and to draw new ones. So we might have to discard a Super Rod in a key moment, or we may have to discard a few extra Pokemon or energy. Ultra Ball discards can be really tough. This deck is really resource intensive, so you don't typically have a ton of cards that you love to discard, and you have to make those decisions because you do have a lot of things that require you to discard cards. So having Super Rods for some extra recovery to make those discards a little bit easier is very nice. Then 1 Night Stretcher, and not just more recovery, but allowing us to get a Pokemon straight to our hand. Of course, you can grab the Dark Energy from a discard, or even a Psychic in a pinch as well, but mostly just grabbing a Pokemon so that we can get it right on the bench and don't have to search it back out with a Nest Ball or Buddy-Buddy Poffin or something like that. Can also grab our Gardevoir EX from the discard pile, which obviously can't be searched with Nest Ball or Poffin, and that can be really nice as well. If our Fezandipiti gets knocked out, we can just go ahead and grab that right to hand. It can also just be used to grab an energy for concealed cards if we really just need to draw 2 more cards. So quite a bit of flexibility in the deck. Then we have 1 copy of Hisuian Heavy Ball, allowing us to just make sure that we don't prize some of these key Pokemon. We only play 1 Munkidori, 1 Flutter, 1 Klefki, 1 Fez, 1 Greninja. We also don't want to prize multiple Ralts. Prizing 1, we still want to be able to fish that out with Heavy Ball. But if we prize 2 especially, then we really need the Heavy Ball to get that out. So yeah, just making sure that we don't prize anything too important. We are pretty reliant on getting our Pokemon down. And then our A-Spec of choice in this list is Secret Box. Just the most consistent A-Spec, allows us to search out 4 cards. We do play a Stadium, the Moonlit Hill, allowing you to grab Bravery Charm or Evo TM as well. And then, of course, grabbing a supporter for next turn. Usually, if you use a supporter to grab Secret Box, then you can just Secret Box for a new supporter for next turn. Or because you have to discard 3 cards, and it typically is hard to figure out what to discard, you're discarding a supporter with the Secret Box and then searching for a new supporter, just because you have to discard something. But also, if we don't have a supporter, then Secret Box can become even more powerful. We can use this to find Ultra Ball Candy Gardevoir EX, or Vessel Ultra Ball, and a Research can be really good if we grab Vessel, sorry, not Vessel, Ultra Ball, but Vessel, Arven for Ultra Ball, and then we can Earthen Vessel for double Psychic, Arven for Ultra Ball those 2 Psychic away, grab Gardevoir EX, and then we have 2 Psychic in discard pile on our Gardevoir EX in hand. So there's so many things that you can do with Secret Box. It synergizes super well with the deck. You like getting energy in the discard pile, so you just discard a bunch of energy if you have a lot of energy in your early hands. Just guarantee, it's basically like the best way to get like Candy Gardevoir set up. It's the best way to have strong, aggressive early games, which otherwise Gardevoir can struggle to do without a tech like Secret Box. Next, we have Stadiums, Tools, and Energy. So we play 1 Moonlit Hill, just giving us that extra little bit of healing, which can be really important, especially against something like Lost Box or Regidrago. Being able to heal is very important, especially to keep our Gardevoir EX out of Lost Impact range. Keep it above the 280 mark is very key, which obviously if we accelerate 3 energy to Gardevoir with Psychic Embrace, that is 60 damage. We need it to be 20 damage or less on it, so then we can use Munkidori and Moonlit Hill to heal it completely. Also just helps us get our Psychic Energy in the discard pile in general. Then we have 3 Bravery Charm. In this list, I feel like we have to discard Bravery Charm quite often, so I think that is why playing 3 is so key. We usually only need 1 or 2 in a game for the Drifloon and Screamtail, but it can also be used to just sort of protect our Pokemon from like Moonlight Shuriken early game. We can put them on Ralts. It protects Flutter Mane and Klefki in matchups where they're really important, like Lost Box. So yeah, playing 3 of these just so that we can discard 1 or prize 1, because we are often having to discard them. Also just allows us to find them more consistently in general as well. Then we're just playing 1 Technical Machine Evolution because the deck is way less reliant on it, since we're a lot of time going for rare candies, but we still want the 1 as an option off of our couple of Arvens in our Secret Box to make sure that we can get quick Kirlias. Then we play 7 Psychic Energy. This is pretty much the standard in Gardevoir. It's exactly enough that you can set up to attack with 2 Gardevoirs, and it's 5. We need 5 energy for a Drifloon, so even if you price 2, then that's still enough to get you sort of your maximum energy on 1 Pokemon. It's just sort of the key number. Obviously, more would be even allow you to find them even easier, but 7 is just sort of the magic number where you can prize 2 and still feel pretty comfortable with 5. And then we just play 1 Darkness Energy for Munkidori. I think you just don't have the room for 2 in this list. If you prize it, it's pretty tough, but you can definitely win games without Munkidori, and you can always draw it off one of your earlier prize cards, which can be really nice. But generally speaking, you only play 1 Munkidori, so you only need 1 Dark Energy, as long as you don't prize it. Now, that's the whole list, but we can get into the matchups here. Starting with our positive matchups, we have Raging Bolt. We just trade really well with them. We can take 1-shots on their 2-price Pokemon with their 1-price Pokemon. We can pick off like Screamtail really easily on the bench. We can shut them down early game with Klefki. We definitely can lose if they just get like really aggressive and we have a bad start, but generally speaking, as long as we set up well, it's pretty favorable. We can use Turo to pull our Gardevoir EX out of play near the end of the game. That way they can only take a 1-price turn on us. So yeah, there's a lot we can do in that matchup. And Lugia V-Star, another favorable matchup. Iron Hands can be annoying, but generally speaking, we can just use Screamtail to chase down their Archeops and then knock out whatever they have energy on. Key in this matchup can be if your opponent gets the early Iron Hands and you have to respond to it, you can just go sort of catch their Archeops, knock that out with Gardevoir EX, then their Iron Hands obviously can't one-shot the Gardevoir EX. But obviously they have, and then if they only have 1 Archeops in play, they can't accelerate enough energy to one-shot a Gardevoir EX with Chinchino either. What else you can do though if you don't find the counter catcher is just sort of Miracle Force into the Iron Hands and use Munkidori to put 30 more on it, and then knock it out with Munkidori on your following turn, and Iono them, and that way the Munkidori gets around both Gift Energy and Legacy Energy. Using Munkidori to play around Gift and Legacy Energy in that matchup in general is very big. And then just continuing to chase down their Archeops is definitely the key. You also can, if you just want to deal with the Iron Hands right away, just go for like a Drifloon 1-shot on it. And then we have Klawf. So Klawf, just a pretty good matchup because we can keep using Iono and then counter-catchering up our opponent's Pokemon and Screamtailing the bench Pokemon. Klefki also does a ton of work to slow them down early game. They're super reliant on the abilities of base Pokemon. They can't even poison without any base Pokemon abilities. So Klefki is just a huge nuisance for them, allowing us to get set up. And then they do struggle to one-shot a Gardevoir EX, so we can sort of tank hits with that and then Turo it back into hand. Then yeah, we just use Counter Catcher to sort of stall stuff in the active, and then Scream Tail and Munkidori to, sort of hit their bench. We're just super, super disruptive, and they have to keep finding double turbo energies to keep attacking, and they struggle to knock out Gardevoir EX, so we just have a lot of options. We can also one-shot their Pokemon with Scream Tail, with Bravery Charm even, just sort of knock out Latias EX on the bench. That can be really, really key as we go like Counter Catcher, something that has a high retreat cost like Brute Bonnet, and then Iono them to a low hand size and just Scream Tail their bench Latias EX. And then from there, they can't easily retreat it unless they find something like a Night Stretcher. And then we have Cerula GX. Another matchup we just trade really well with. We can one-shot it with Drifloon, and we're usually going to get the first 2 prize cards. If they play Palkia V-Star and go first and get turn 2 Moonlit Shuriken, they can give us some trouble. But other than that, we generally speaking, we can get ahead on the prize trade. They take 1 prize, and then we just go in for like a Miracle Force Counter Catcher on a Squawkabilly or a Fezandipiti, or we just go in with a Drifloon with 5 energy and a Bravery Charm to one-shot their Cerule Edge. They're also pretty prone to hand disruption. They don't have like that much, like sometimes they play Reverum, but even then they still need to have an energy in hand. So we can just sort of go for like Iono's Counter Catchers late game. Counter Catcher up at Fezandipiti, Iono them to a low hand size, hit it for 190, and then our next turn knock it out with Adrenabrain and sort of take the prize lead that way. Then we have Roaring Moon EX, another very favorable matchup just because we can trade really well with them. We'll almost always get the first 2 prize cards. They take 1 prize, and then we can go in with something like a Drifloon. Even if you have a slower start, we can pretty easily come back. Like in the Raging Bolt matchup, we can just pretty consistently use Turo in the late game to force a 1 prize board and throw them off that way. And we can... It's not as easy to play around stuff like Fezandipiti in this build where we can't just like easily go Counter Catcher Fezandipiti, Miracle Force, then Adrenabrain on the next turn and force them to find a retreat because they do have Petra on DX usually, but we can just one-shot the Petra on DX earlier in the game and then go for the stall play later. We can also just sort of like Counter Catcher up something that doesn't have energy on it that can't attack. I know them to a low hand size and then Scream Tail their Petra on DX I talked about with Cloth. Knocking out their Latias EX. We can do that with the Petrunt and Roaring Moon, or if they play Latias, we can do that with Latias as well. So yeah, there's lots of ways to sort of try to take the prize lead. And then, of course, they need to keep finding Gus because we're attacking with 1 prizers and hand disrupting them. Then our even matchups, we have Miraidon. Miraidon definitely can be tricky. This might be sort of a hot take that it's even an even matchup. They can just sort of Iron Hands really, really quickly, but they're pretty weak to Iono without access to Fezandipiti, and we can obviously continuously prevent access to Fezandipiti using Adrenabrain to knock them out on the next turn. And so, yeah, just chasing down their support Pokemon, chasing down their Mew and their Fezandipiti, and trying to just play around with them drawing as few cards as possible. They obviously can't use the Iron Hands to one-shot Gardevoir EX, so you can just sort of send up a Gardevoir EX and force them to find Boss. If they can't find Boss, then you can sort of take a lead that way. Then we have Charizard EX. So with this build of deck, Charizard is pretty close matchup. You just have to try to one-shot their Charizards with Drifloon. And once again, playing around Fezandipiti can be really important. We can also, sort of go for the Pidgeot. We can just sort of like Iono them to a low hand size, Drifloon, one-shot the Pidgeot, and then go for another Drifloon, knock out the Charizard the next turn. And that sort of limits their options. Vacuum can be really annoying for knocking out Drifloon if they play that. But generally speaking, we can do pretty well just trying to trade 2 for 2. Of course, they one-shot our Gardevoir EX with Charizard, so that can be a problem. But we can Turo the Gardevoir to play later. So yeah, it's very close. They can take an aggressive lead. We can take an aggressive lead either way. We're both weak to Iono in the later game because both decks are really good at disrupting and they can counter catch up our Kirlias and pick them off so that their Ionos are more effective. There's a lot of back and forth in this matchup of players whiffing off of Ionos. But generally we want to knock out their Pidgeot and then knock out their Charizard. And then we have Lost Box. So even with the Flutter main and Klefki, I still think this is an even matchup. We don't play Metafy, so Moonlight Shuriken can definitely come in and take a 2-prize turn against this pretty quickly. And we can still be prone to like Moonlight Shuriken plus Roxanne, even if we take a significant prize lead. If you watch the NAIC finals game between Andrew Hedrick and Stefan Ivanov, that's a very good example of a very good showing of why this matchup is 50-50, even though it seems like it might be Gardevoir favored because of Flutter main and Klefki. even with a lead, Lost Box can still make a huge comeback with Iron Hands and Moonlight Shuriken. Then we have Iron Thorns. Initialization can be really annoying. We can't use Psychic Embrace, but we do have Klefki and Fluttermane and Turo to pick them back up. So generally, the key in this matchup is to retreat into the Fluttermane or Klefki, Turo them back into your hand so they can't get knocked out by Lost City after accelerating energy to the board while they're active. So you use that to shut off initialization, accelerate energy, then Turo the Gardevoir up into the active spot and keep attacking. And that can be pretty tough for them to keep up with. The thing is that things just don't flow super well all the time. Sometimes the Iron Thorns player just is shutting you down with initialization. They're hitting Pokemon catcher heads, hitting boss turn after turn, knocking all your Kirlias to limit your draw, judging and Ionoing you to a low hand size, and you just can't find the combo pieces to get the Fluttermane or Klefki in the active to begin with. And that's where things get really tricky. But as long as if you can find Fluttermane and just keep the pressure on, keep attacking, Iono them to low hand sizes in the late game, you should have a pretty favorable position. Lost City can also give you like a pretty tough time to lost zoning your Kirlias or your Drifloon or your Fluttermane if you open it. Then we have Goldango, another pretty favorable matchup. We can, they're obviously pretty reliant on finding a lot of cards to take their big knockouts, but they do have coin bonus, so even with Ionos, they're still getting like lots of draw. But we can generally trade pretty favorable with them. Togekiss can be really annoying if they just get a lot of heads and are taking lots of extra prizes, or if they go first and get like a turn 2 Moonlight Shuriken, can certainly be annoying. But generally speaking, we can definitely do a lot of work with Iono and Counter Catcher, and then just sort of trade favorably for the rest of the game. Then we have Snorlax. So Snorlax might be even slightly unfavored right now, just with the way that our list is built and the way that current Snorlax lists are built. But we can just sort of set up a board. Ideally, we want to set up a board that's just like all Ralts and then one Gardevoir, and then Fluttermane and Klefki, since Fluttermane and Klefki can't be trapped by block. And then if our opponent pulls up Ralts with Counter Catcher, we can just Teleportation Burst out of the active. We do have to worry about Handheld Fan stopping Teleportation Burst from being as effective. But we can definitely, if some of our Ionos stick and they miss some counter catchers here and there after we attack with Gardevoir EX, then we can take a few prizes in a row with one Gardevoir EX and sort of take the lead. And then we still have a one retreat out in Turo at some point in the game as well. We don't want to overbench too many different things, because as soon as we start having to commit energy to stuff like Drifloon and Screamtail, it's just sort of all over. We don't have enough energy to spread to 6 different attackers, which we do have to have 6 Pokemon on board, usually even 4 different attackers if we have our Fluttermane and Klefki keeping up bench spots, so that we have 2 Pokemon that just can't be trapped, that we can just leave on the bench. That does help, but we still don't, with only 7 Psychic, 1 Dark, don't really have enough energy to go around, so we do need some things to go our way, and our opponent missing key gusting turns, so that we can get a couple of extra prize cards in. Then unfavorable matchups, we have Drago. Even with all of the answers that we play, I think the Drago matchup is close to 50-50, but I don't think it's favorable, which I have seen a lot of people saying Gardevoir can be favorable to Drago with this list. From a lot of testing that I did leading up to Toronto Regionals, which is going to be coming up this weekend as of the time that I'm posting this, I just found that if the Drago player was really good and the Gardevoir player was really good, the Drago player still had a slight edge. Trifrost can steal so many games from you. It's just so hard to come back from. You really need something to go wrong on the Drago player's end for it to be favorable for Gardevoir. And you need a lot to go right for you when they have a decent setup. You need to find Candy Gardevoir usually. You need to find the Iono at the right times. You need them to, the Iono to stick. EX can give you a big problem because you can't... unlike Fez, where you can sort of play around it by knocking out the Fez with Adrenabrain, or just knocking out whatever you're going to knock out with Adrenabrain to avoid turns of flip the script. You can't do the same thing with Mew. They're always going to have that extra little bit of draw as long as it's on bench after an Iono. And then, of course, Drago is like pretty tough to knock out. You know, we can one-shot it with Drifloon, but if we don't find the pieces because we don't have as much draw, because we don't have as many Kirlia, because of Trifrost, that can be really problematic as well. And then, of course, the damage ramps up really quickly because they have Phantom Dive. Lost Impact can one-shot Gardevoir EX pretty easily if we don't get a lot of healing on it and have to power it up with triple Psychic Embrace. So our opponent just has a lot of options. I do think that it's winnable with, you know, like Ionos and counter catchers. Like I said, I think it's close to 50-50. Drifloon one-shotting Red Drago is really nice. Rare Candy Gardevoir is pretty reasonable to pull off to stay in the game even after a Trifrost. We can definitely come back from Trifrost a lot. We can come back from 4 price deficits quite a bit. But I do think we still need something to go wrong a little bit on the Drago players and to make it work. Then we have Terapagos, mostly referring to Terapagos Pidgeot. This matchup, they just can get really aggressive with Dusknoir and Prime Catcher, keep our Kirlias off the board. Like with the Drago matchup, we can definitely get back in there with Rare Candy Gardevoir and start, applying pressure. You know, maybe we just chase down their Hoots and limit their draw that way. We can knock out the Terapagos with Adrenabrain after 1 Miracle Force and 1 Adrenabrain. Then we can knock it out with another Adrenabrain on the next turn. We can go ahead and Drifloon to one-shot their Pidgeot. So there's a lot of things that we can do to disrupt them in combination with Ionos, but just like the fact that they have all the they can just bench multiple Hoots, a bunch of Duskulls, and have so much access to, like, all they need to do is find a Noctowl to draw a lot of cards, right? And then plus they have the Pidgeot in addition to that, like, even if you knocked out the Pidgeot, they still have the Noctowls to get their stuff off. They're still using a bunch of Dusknoirs to put a lot of pressure on us. They can one-shot our Gardevoir with, kind of one-shot if they, use Dusknoir first and then knock it out. So they're just really aggressive, and then they can Iono us low hand sizes, which our deck is usually pretty good at, being able to not take too many prize cards early and manipulate how we take the prize cards, so that we're always drawing a lot of cards off Iono. But of course the Dusknoir puts a wrench in that, allows them to heavily disrupt us and knock out multiple Kirlias in the same turn. Then there's Dragapult, which also, can be annoying because of Dusknoir, but just generally Phantom Dive can set up a lot of multiple KOs on us. It means that Drifloon and Screamtail aren't as effective because they can sort of boss around them, put them on the bench, and then take easy knockouts on them with Phantom Dive on that way. I do think the matchup's fine. I think it's like close to 50-50, but I do think that Dragapult has a very slight edge, especially with the Radiant Alakazam, allowing them to manipulate damage around. The Iron Thorns build, I think, is a bit better for Gardevoir, now that build has sort of become more popular. But I think that Iron Thorns can still give you a tough time in the early game. However, as soon as they take a prize, you can just start counter-catchering around the Iron Thorns and then using Psychic Embrace. So I do think the Dragapult Iron Thorns matchup is a little bit better. Munkidori puts in a lot of work. Turo, you can use to heal, but I still think that Dragapult has a slight edge, generally speaking. Lastly, we have possibly Gardevoir's worst matchup, definitely one of them. It's not unwinnable for Gardevoir. You can still Rare Candy Gardevoir, but Palkia Dusknoir is really tough. They just can use Dusknoir to pick off a bunch of your Pokemon. They have Moonlight Shuriken turn to almost every game to knock out double Kirlia, so you're almost always going to have to find Rare Candy Gardevoir early on in order to stay in the game. So they just put so much pressure on you so quickly, knock out so many of your Pokemon. They really accelerate the game, and they force you to draw a lot off of a little, right? Like, they use turn 2, they can do as much as like double Dusknoir plus Moonlight Shuriken, take 4 prize cards. I'm going to do 2 low hand size. Sometimes you may not even have 4 Pokemon in play. If you only have 3 Pokemon in play, they can still donk you that way. So you need to have a lot to keep up with them. I think if you do get set up well, it's definitely very winnable still, but you need so much at all points in the game to keep up. And the game happens so quickly. Like, Palkia Dusknoir is so good for that. It's so good for like making you draw a lot really quickly because they have so much draw. They can draw so much early game. They just use a bunch of Dusknoirs and Moonlight Shuriken, and then they're basically winning in 2 to 3 turns. So you just need a lot to keep up. But that is everything. I think that Gardevoir is still very well positioned. I think that, like I said, Drago I think is 45-55, very close matchup. Terapagos Pidgeot, maybe a little bit worse, maybe like 40-60, but maybe up to 45-55. It's definitely not that bad. Dragapult also probably 45-55. If it's they're playing the Dragapult Iron Thorns build specifically, it might even be 50-50 or a little bit better. Palkia Dusknoir, that is your worst matchup. I'd say personally, from playing it a lot, especially from Palkia's side, probably like 30-70 for Gardevoir. Definitely winnable, but very, very tough if the Palkia player really knows what they're doing. But Drago, Trapghost, and Dragapult, all close matchups. All matchups that I think if you're the better player, like if you can outskill your opponents, if you know Gardevoir really well, you'll probably win those matchups more often. I think that the better player is usually going to win. That's something nice about Gardevoir in general, is most of your matchups, if you know how to play your deck really, really well, the deck is really good at allowing you to improve your odds of winning through skill expression. Not all decks can do that as much. Every deck takes some amount of skill, and skill is always going to improve your chances of winning, but there are definitely some decks that don't give you as much of room to show your skill as others, and Gardevoir is a deck that really allows you to show that you know what you're doing, and if your opponent isn't quite as skilled as you are in the matchup, then they're always going to have an edge, even if it is on paper sort of a weaker matchup. So if you are comfortable with Gardevoir, I definitely highly recommend it. If you aren't comfortable with it, I do think that it's a good deck to start getting comfortable with if you are interested. I think the deck is still super, super well positioned, and it's probably going to be a pretty solid play into most events, all the way up until rotation. Thank you everyone for watching. If you want to check out any of my other content or my socials, the links to all of that will be in the description below, and I will see you again very soon.